It is indeed a great pleasure for the Kennedy Summer School that the Garda Commissioner, Nóirín has agreed to come and be the third participant in the Life of the Summer School in the Kennedy Summer School lecture. We did the first one 3 years ago with Geraldine Kennedy, shortly after she retired at the Irish Times. We did one with Mary O'Rourke about 2 years ago. And we're delighted that the Commissioner has agreed to talk to us for about 50 minutes. We're going to take a look at some aspects of our own career and draw from them some significant contemporary political and other issues. About halfway in, what I plan to do is take some questions from the audience and then I will focus on some of the central themes. But first, can I ask you to give a special Nuash welcome to the Garda Commissioner, Nóirín. Pulling stuff together for this interview, he said, you haven't done an interview like this before.
No, and sometimes I wonder, how did I ever succumb and agree to come here to be interviewed by Nóirín, a barrister at the Kennedy Summer School. But no, it's a great privilege to be here.
But why have you not done an interview like this before?
Well, I think it's very important because the role of Garda Commissioner is really focused on making sure that the organisation that is on Garda Síochána is working and serving the community and making sure that the organisation is fit for that purpose and that the men and women of Garda Síochána are there to do that. So it's far less about me as an individual than it is about the Garda Síochána as an entity and the men and women of Garda Síochána and our role in the community and our relationship with the community. So yes, I haven't done very many profile interviews. Maybe I will do some again in the future, but I think that the focus needs to be on the work of Garda Síochána, the role of Garda Síochána, and our relationship with the community.
What age were you when you joined the Garda?
I was 21.
And what had you done before you were 21?
I had a very interesting and very diverse career from the time I stopped school. My first job was working in a vegetable shop, which people would say to me, was it good? Yes, it was great. I learned how to bag potatoes, sack coal and make wreaths. Very important job to do, but it was really good. And it was actually in the heart of Ballymun Shopping Centre in Dublin, which was a life experience in itself.
Where are you from?
I'm from Dublin. I grew up in Dublin, and I grew up in between Coolock and Finglas. So Ballymun would be very close to where I grew up.
And how does the decision come about? Had your family in the Garda? Been interested in policing? Where did the decision come to join the Garda?
Well, some would say maybe I did it to annoy my mother, who was horrified at the thought that that's what I was going to do. But no, I think the reality is that it was a combination of curiosity. It wasn't the done thing for women to join Garda Síochána. It was quite unusual. It was quite unique in its time, so that attracted me in some ways. And also, I had no family as such in the Guards other than a granduncle and my great-grandfather. My great-grandfather was an RIC man who came from a spa in County Kerry. And then my granduncle was a member of the GMP. But they had retired, and I'm not sure, maybe somewhere in the background there was that influence, but I think it was really about that sense of curiosity. And the other thing that really, really interested me was I remember growing up as a child in Coolock. And I remember seeing a particular guard, a guy by the name of Patrick Doherty. But he used to go around and he seemed to be omnipresent. And every parent around the place that wanted their child to stay on track, threatened them with this particular guard. And it just intrigued me how this one man could have such an influence on everybody. And I suppose it's a combination of those things, but I think if I was to attribute it to something, it was probably the curiosity factor, that sense of doing something that was absolutely different and doing something that possibly could make a difference.
So at 21 years of age, you head down to a quiet rural town, Templemore and Tipperary. Did you know anybody else going in that class or intake?
Absolutely not. And I can still remember being dropped at the gate with my suitcase and nobody was allowed to go beyond the gate, and you go in.
No civilian was allowed beyond the gate?
No civilian was allowed beyond the gate. So there was no such thing as you do now. Your parents come with you and you get a kind of a little, I suppose, a recce of what it looks like, and your parents could stay with you for a little while. But you were left at the gate and dropped in the deep end.
And were there any other women in the class or intake?
We had an interesting group. There were 25 of us, 25 altogether. And it was probably, maybe it was indicative of something to come because there was 13 women and 12 men.
And what kind of a training did you get? 13 women, 12 men, nearly 50-50?
Mm-hmm.
This is in the 80s.
Yes, yeah.
What kind of training did you get?
Well, it was very much focused on police duties and police studies and learning a lot. So it was, very much focused on learning the law, the legislation. Again, very interesting because even in 1981 when I joined, and sometimes I like to tell people to remember I was only 2 when I joined, even though I'd given it away to Noel, and that's what a barrister does to you. But I think the reality was that it was very much focused on police duties. Irish was a big part of it as well, and you did some Irish studies. But what was really interesting, because even in 1981, even the women, we did firearms training as a kind of a basic component of the training. And that wasn't the same even in our colleagues in the RUC as they were up the road. At that stage, the women weren't involved in firearms training. But it was very classroom oriented. Drills.
Sorry, women didn't do firearm training before you?
Women did here, but
right.
not, for example, in the PSNI. It was 1994 before they could. But the reality was that it was very much focused, and a big component of it actually was drill. And we spent a lot of time on the square with a drill sergeant. And, for somebody like me that wasn't used to, some of the lads have been in the FCA, but I'd never had a drill sergeant bellowing in my ear and not knowing what to do. But actually, looking back and reflecting, it was a very good way of actually putting discipline in place. It made you stand up straight, it made sure that your posture was correct. So actually it was very good. You could say it was a finishing school or a starting school for something to come.
So you have firearms training?
Yes.
Have you ever drawn it?
Yes.
Tell us why. Can you tell us why?
Well, I suppose I should have said at the outset, the nature of the work that I've done over the years, there's probably quite a lot of things that I can't talk about in any great detail. But, I've worked operationally all of my career, practically all of my career. And a lot of it, all of my career would have been, particularly in the early years, would have been working at the coalface. So I would have worked in the whole drugs and organised crime area. And that would have meant, on occasions, having to do what we call really hard stop policing and really been there at the front line. So yes, on occasions that would have to happen, and on occasions you wouldn't want that to happen, but on occasions it did. So I prefer not to go into the details of it, but yes, but you're trained and you're prepared for it, and we would have also, not then, but as a detective, we would have done tactical training. So you're prepared for a number of different scenarios.
So for a period you were an armed detective?
Yes, for the vast majority. So for some people would say I was on drugs all of my career, or most of my career. So I would have worked as so when you join the Guards, you join as a recruit Garda, and then you work your way up through the ranks, which I think is very beneficial because it gives you a huge breadth and depth of experience. So when I joined, I would have been a guard. I would have worked in Store Street, which is in the north inner city. At the time in 1981, it's now, for anybody that knows it, it's where the IFSC is. But at that time, it was a very socially deprived area, but a very strong community. Very underprivileged community, but very, very strong. And it taught me an awful lot. When I worked there first, I would have seen at that stage in the early 1980s, heroin was really taking a grip, and the heroin epidemic was really, really beginning to hit. And I suppose what was interesting for me now, reflecting on my career, was I was actually there and almost saw the birth of the organised crime gangs that were there. And some of the people that are very notorious today in terms of feuding and everything, we would have seen the birth and the growth of them, and actually heroin taking a grip on communities and been used almost as a mechanism to tear communities apart and to wreak absolute havoc. But then I would have, very early on, myself and another, coming from Dublin and been able to speak with a Dublin accent when I absolutely need to. But I must admit though, my parents were from West Cork, my dad from West Cork, my mum from Clare, who were always determined we would never have a Dublin accent. So I was able to put it on when I needed to, but never at home. But what was really interesting was myself and another couple of guys thought that we could actually get in, because the traditional ways of policing weren't working when it came to dealing particularly with heroin and particularly with some of the gangs who were involved in that. So we came up with an idea that actually maybe Serpico had an influence in that great programme that was on, but we came up with an idea that we could actually get in there amongst them. We could actually work undercover, literally hang around. It's not at all
So you pretended to be a drug addict?
Yes, and the local...
How do you go about it, in a sense? Fitting in, or...?
Well, much to my mother's dismay, I did the job very well, I have to say, much much to my mother's dismay. But you actually take on the persona, so you actually spend a lot of time just literally hanging around, getting to know people, obviously not as yourself, so you have to be very disciplined in that as well, because you are taking on a different persona. And you're there in the community, but it's not about actually, it's about getting the intelligence about who's actually, where the supply networks are, where are they. I've been out there on the street, and you know, again, I was very fortunate in many ways, because my sons, and I can still remember pushing a wheelchair. Dublin is a very small place, and Ireland is a very small place. And I can still remember pushing a buggy with my son in it and my mother there as the doting granny, and somebody coming up to me who my mother was looking at saying, who are these people? Why are they calling you by a name that's not your name? Who do they think you are? And I said, it's okay, everything will be okay. But you get there, you build trust, you build confidence. Also at the same time you're working, there's a community that has been hugely impacted by the efforts of these drug dealers, by the efforts of these people that want to cause harm to the communities. They're really good, strong people in the community. And as well as identifying the supply routes, you identify where the really strong community elements are, and where are the people that can help you in a partnership way to actually do what you want to do. And that was what a lot of my time was spent. So I did that as a guard.
And then is this the stage when there's what I read somewhere called the Moxies, was it?
Yeah, the local...
Where does the name come from?
The local drug dealers used to be amazed at how we could get in there, how we could get the information, how we could get the intelligence, and how we could actually catch them and have them brought before the courts. Because that was the purpose, was about bringing people to justice. And not catching people who were addicted and who were falling prey to addiction, but actually catching the people who were the cause of it. So they christened us the Mockies, which is mock drug addicts. And there was a very famous book called Smack, which had to be taken off the market because of defamatory comments about some of these other people. And so actually they wrote some things about us in that as well.
So I see then you rise gradually, effectively through the drug squad.
Yes.
And you're in charge of them.
Mm-hmm.
Come back a little earlier first. Somebody told me to ask you the question about being disciplined for refusing to make the tea.
It was sandwiches.
Sandwich, sorry. Refusing to make the sandwich.
Yeah, and you know, actually the story isn't really about the sandwiches, but it was when I was a recruit. And at the time, a recruit guard, you came out of Templemore after doing your training, you went to your station and you were on a probationary period. And when I went to Store Street first, the women weren't working on the regular unit. So, and I think again, context is really important, because when I joined in Garda Síochána, there was less than 1% of the organisation were women. Actually, we were a tiny number. And when the women were conditioned to working, I suppose, restricted beat patrols and dealing with women and children and some administrative duties. And I suppose, did I know what to expect? No. But did I think I knew what to expect? Yes, of course, I was 21. And what I expected was that I was going to do the same thing as the guys were doing. And I remember being called back one day and being asked, would I make some sandwiches? And I was saying, no, I can't, because I'm doing something. Actually, I'm on the beat. And I remember and I was very fortunate because we had just had a new superintendent. But I remember I was sent home, not by him, but by, as it turned out, the band sergeant. And we were called Band Garda, which was the Irish band for women. And we wore skirts, but it was the band sergeant, the female sergeant, actually sent me home and said, come back tomorrow.
Because you refused to make the sandwich?
Yes.
It was a female sergeant?
Yes.
Okay.
And I remember the following night, and on the bus going home, I remember saying, my God, and it did tell me, if you come back here, the superintendent's going to deal with this. But I think though she didn't know, nor the superintendent knew, I was more terrified of going home to tell my mother that actually maybe I was in trouble than I was of coming in to face the super the next day. But when I did come in to face the super the next day, he taught me some very valuable lessons. He was a man by the name of Tommy Riley, who has since died. And I remember he taught me a few very valuable lessons, because he taught me the difference between can't and won't. And I remember I was making the point, I can't. And he said, yes, you can, but the fact is you won't. And he said there's a difference. But actually, that encounter allowed me to have an access to him on that occasion, which I suppose in some ways exposed me to him. But also all of a sudden he was saying, well, what are you seeing out there? So he was very much ahead of his time, very progressive. And I was saying, well, there's a real problem with drugs and we can't do this. And also he was the one that gave me the opportunity to actually go on a regular unit, which just means that I was doing the shift work and everything else. But also it gave him an interest in what was happening. And I think he's one of the people that actually, over the years, encouraged me a lot. Because even though he was removed from me and retired as a deputy commissioner, occasionally he'd say to me, you can't stay doing that all of your life. You're really good at doing that, you're really good at that drugs and organised crime stuff, but you have to do something different.
Okay. And you went on during a second since to have a fairly rapid rise to the senior ranks of the Garda and to study at the FBI in my own places like that. But before now you are a kind of one of the most high-profile women in leading positions in the country. I mean, this is the thing about repeated stories about the Minister for Justice is a woman, the Attorney General is a woman, the Chief Justice is a woman, the Director of Public Prosecution is a woman, the Garda Commissioner is the first woman. Does that matter to you, or are you bored by all that stuff?
I think what matters to me, not the fact that I'm a woman, what I would like to do is be recognised for being competent and capable and able to do the job. And I would also like to be recognised for the fact that actually where I am today is born out of the experience that I have had in what I call the University of Life. And yes, I went and I did more organised structure studies. But actually I was at something this morning and somebody asked me about what's rewarding about An Garda Síochána. And for me, it's actually the rewarding thing is actually knowing that I have done something which has made a difference, and knowing that the experience that I've gained from those communities back in the days of Store Street, from my experience, has led to that.
But I suppose my question is, do you see yourself as a role model for young women generally, for young police officers, or are you dismissive of those distinctions?
I wouldn't say I'm dismissive of the distinctions, but I think that we've really achieved something when we're looking at the person as opposed to the gender. And I think that what's really important to me is that actually it's the best person and the most capable person for the job.
So when you go into Temple 1, you start with the Guards. How far did you think you would go? Or what were your ambitions at that stage?
When I went in the gate, it was to get through the 6 months of training.
And at what stage did you think, God, I could be an inspector, or I could be
I think always through my career, and as I say, the career was in and out of drugs as a guard, a sergeant, a detective sergeant, a detective inspector, detective superintendent. And, at all stages I was just focused on doing the job I was doing. And, it was people like Tommy Riley and Dinny Mullins, who was at the head of the drug squad at that time, who was an absolutely great man. And it was people like that who said to me, look, you can do so much more. You can't do this because we're good at something, and we're all human, so we all like staying at what we're good at and our niche area. But I do remember making two decisions I remember making, and I was influenced by two things. As I say, my children were very young, and working operationally, and particularly in a demand-driven role where the operation dictates the pace, so that the operation or the job dictated whether you were gone for days or weeks or hours. But also in terms of making sure that I was lucky because my parents were there, so I had a good family support network. But I remember when my middle son was probably about 3 years old, and I was pregnant with my third son. And I remember saying, okay, if I'm going to go for sergeant, I'm going to have to be really careful about actually how I manage everything. And I did think about it going. But the other one, which is probably a slighter note, I remember my husband is a member of An Garda Síochána as well. And I remember at one stage, an older superintendent saying to me, do you know something, you're really great, and one of these days you're going to get promoted, but you'll never get promoted before your husband. And I remember that probably steeled up my determination. Now, by the way, I didn't get promoted as sergeant before my husband did that, but it changed after that.
But as I say, you didn't go to college before you went to the Guards. Many of the graduates do now. You didn't get that opportunity. But you did, in a sense, do degrees by night and get blocks of training in policing abroad, management here. You end up heading up special agencies, and then in the human resources side in Garda headquarters, you're an assistant commissioner, and then you're the deputy commissioner for ops, which is effectively the second in charge. Where on that timeline do you I could be commissioner?
I don't think at any stage I made a determination that I could be commissioner. I think I just stayed focused on what I was doing. And particularly, I remember as a superintendent, it was my first time when I was promoted in 2000 as a superintendent. I went to the Garda College in charge of specialist training, so in charge of all of our firearms, our tactical training and our interagency training. And at that stage I decided that actually if I was going to be really serious about progression at a management level, in 1992 I had done a diploma in addiction studies in Trinity College because I wanted to get a better understanding about the community impact and the personal impact of drugs. But in 2000 I decided that if I was going to be really serious about taking strategic focus, I needed to do something more structured in terms of learning. And I went and I did a BA in police management. But then I decided if I'm going to do this and pursue this, then I need to actually really think about this hard. But what I wanted to do as well was actually make sure that I could apply. My profession is, I've worked all of my life as an operational police person. So what I know best is operations, but operations are really about strategizing and about making sure that you can actually apply the principles. So I set myself an aim of saying, could I actually do some kind of structured education which was actually going to be able to bridge the gap between operational learning and operational policing and academic learning. And I remember going to do, I chose to do an MBS at night and at weekends in the Smurfit School. And I remember Andreas Buttimer, who was our tutor at the time, said, well, what are you doing here and what do you want to do? I said, I want to make that bridge. And he said, I'm not sure I really understand what you mean, but I explained it. And I actually did a whole thing about professionalising. My thesis was on professionalising of the investigative process, crime scene to court, and actually showing how you could apply the academic learning to the operational environment. And I think it's really interesting because if you try to, particularly at that stage in 2000 and onwards, we were training up our senior management cadre and we had lots of really good training opportunities. The Garda Executive Leadership Programme in collaboration with the Smurfit Business School and Harvard University. But if we were going to translate that for our operational managers, you had to be able to give it to them in a sense that they actually understood.
You're Deputy Commissioner for Operations. You go home one night, Martin Callanan is the Commissioner. You come in the next morning and he's not the Commissioner. Were you shocked?
I suppose the shock was when catapulted suddenly into the limelight. So one day you're Deputy Commissioner Operations dealing with...
I mean, usually there's a lead-in or a retirement date or a handover, but you literally go home one night and come in the next morning and you're acting Commissioner.
And I think that was, being catapulted into that position where all of a sudden you've been handed over everything, there is no lead-in time. We were dealing, what was it saying about our Garda Síochána to the community? Were people wondering if we were still going to be open for business? And I remember meeting my own team on that particular day and saying, look,
But let's start with reality that they weren't your own team.
Mm-hmm.
The day before they were Martin Callanan's team. So it was their resistance because you come, it all happens so quickly, because you're a woman, because you come.
I think there's, people deal with things like that in a very different way. So, obviously there was lots of people who were shocked. There were lots of people who were very disappointed in the way that things had happened. There were a number of different things coming to play. And I think that, people's reactions and they're fearful. Even internally, people are very fearful. They don't know what's going to happen, what's going to come next. This is a big deal. The Commissioner goes overnight. Where's the continuity? What's going to happen next? And for me, the job was to steady the ship, to let people vent, to let people grieve in a certain sense, and then to say, look, we have to keep the show on the road. We have to keep the twin tracks. We are, Garda Síochána, as you know, is unique among police services. There is no other comparable police service in the world, and I don't say that lightly. Having worked with police services the world over, there is no other comparable police service. We are a community-based organisation. We are a national police force. Even our partners in the UK, they're constabularies. We are a national police force. We have the dual role of being the security service. And having worked as Assistant Commissioner of Crime and Security in charge of our counter-terrorism units, and with everything that's going on in terms of transnational crime and international terrorism as was in 2011, business continuity was an absolute. It had to go on. So it was my job to very much steady the ship. At the same time, to get out into the community and make sure that the community knew that we were still open for business, that actually, look, whatever is going on, and you know, people were saying to me, there's nothing wrong with our guards, the local guards are absolutely fine. And something that we enjoy, which I think defines us from other police forces, is the community support.
But you come to the job, as I say, rapidly. You come without an order of succession. You come at the height of public and political controversy. Does that make, would you have preferred it were different?
Yes, I would have preferred it was different. But on reflection, what was very different, which I think was very beneficial, was that for the first time ever in the history of the state, and we're almost 100 years in existence, for the first time ever in the history of the state, there was a decision taken by government that not alone would this competition be opened up to, that it would be competitive, because heretofore the appointment was made by government. So there was a succession.
But that must have been a pain in the butt. Not only did the government ask me overnight to step up to be acting commissioner, but then say you must apply for the job yourself in international open competition. So you have to do the job and apply for the job simultaneously in the international competition simultaneously.
Yes, it was very...
That created a sense among people that she may not be here for very long.
Absolutely, and I think, you know, one of the big challenges, I wouldn't recommend it to anybody, because one of the big challenges was exactly that. For that 9 months, you know, you had people internally, so it was opened up, the job competition was opened up to everybody. You had internal candidates, you had external candidates. Interestingly, one of the first calls I got was from a very good friend and colleague in the US. There was an international headhunt, and a colleague in the US rang me to say, I've been asked, do I want to apply for a job in Ireland? And I said, great. And I said, what job is it? He said, your job. So I said, okay, I wish you luck. But the reality is that it is very difficult, because you have power, but you don't have any power. And the reality is that in that 9 months, you have people who are competitors working with you. You're trying to lead them. You're trying to bring them in a certain direction. You're also, at the same time, the government had committed to a programme of reform for Garda Síochána, and you're trying to drive through on some of those reforms. But yet, exactly as you say, people are saying, why should we follow this woman or this person? Because, you know, another 6 or 8 or 9 months, we may have somebody completely different who has a different view. And I think that was a particularly difficult period. And then even going through the whole process of an open competition, and there were several layers to it. But on reflection, it actually was really, really good, because I always knew that if there was, and there was a tone in public commentary, there was a
that it should be somebody from outside.
Yes, yeah. Anybody but an insider.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did they tell you why they gave you the job?
No.
Why do you think you got the job? The top job?
Well, I think, and I believe...
This was an interview panel that I think had the current chair of the police authority and some other outside people on it. I mean, what, do you remember the interview? What do you think coming out of it?
I remember the process of the interview, and I remember my own... I suppose what I can rely on is my own focus going into the interview. And I do remember several stages along that process deciding and making a conscious decision, would I or wouldn't I? Because
did you think at a stage, did you say, like, just for the other soldiers, I'm not going to apply for a permanent job?
I did, and I thought about it in the context that if the decision has been made that it's going to be anybody but an insider, why bother? But I think what may have persuaded the interview panel, and not just persuaded the interview panel, the one thing that I knew that I had going for me, above probably, I won't say above anybody else, but the one thing that I knew was the passion and the belief in what it is that the men and women of Garda Síochána do. And the passion and the belief in the role of Garda Síochána in Irish society. And, you know, that's a passion that has driven me for the last 35 years, and that's a passion that drives me today. And, you know, somebody has asked me recently about, you know, what keeps you going on the bad days? Actually, it's that drive and that passion and that absolute belief in what it is we do and what it is that we can do together with the community.
But what do you say to those who say that sometimes there's a sense from many elements of the Garda that what they do is always right, that this kind of band of brothers, a kind of culture that says, well, we must protect our own, that there's a lack of transparency, that anybody who whistleblows or who speaks out, particularly from within, is frightened or worse.
there's been that sense that culture is there. That the thing that is the best about the Guards is that they will stand and sometimes literally fight for each other, but sometimes that they will do or say anything for each other.
I think sometimes culture is an easy accusation. And I think culture is made up of many things, and I remember we had a big debate on this because yes, there are things about our culture that needs to change, but there's things about a lot of cultures that need to change. But culture to me is a mosaic of little things that mean a lot. And you know, for me and my experiences, the culture of Garda Síochána is about men and women who every single day, every single morning, every single night, no matter what the conditions, leave their homes and go out there in the service of civilised living. And you know, they will make the ultimate sacrifice, and they will be that thin blue line that stands between the citizen and chaos. And there are many things about our culture that needs to change. We're very, very good at confronting wrongdoing anywhere, and indeed we have a very good track record of confronting wrongdoing in our own. And I think Irish society and the Irish people, and we are very lucky that by and large we have a very, very solid police force. But we're a service that are made up, and I'd like to make that point as well, because you know, we've come from being a police force that have grown out of the ashes of the Civil War. And as I sat on Easter Sunday looking at us commemorating 100 years of Irish state, you know, we are coming to the next anniversary of 100 years of policing in Ireland. And we are no longer a police force which was necessary to transition from a Civil War state to a civilised society. We are a police service. And since I became Commissioner, we have made that point that we are a service in the service of the state. And I think what's really, really important for me is that actually what we learn to do is we're almost 16,000 people. We're a microcosm of society. We have all the strengths and all the failings. And sometimes people come with a perspective into the organisation. They see things through a different lens. And we have to learn to listen in a different way. And we have to learn not to shirk away from criticism. And you know, again, as part of the reform initiatives with the policing authority, which is a very, very welcome addition to the whole oversight architecture, with the Garda Síochána Ombudsman Commission and the Garda Síochána Inspectorate, I think there are lots and lots of opportunities to listen, to hear that criticism, and to act upon it. And sometimes let that be somebody internally that wants to raise something. It may not always be right, but it's their perspective. And their perspective needs to be listened to, it needs to be heard, and it needs to be reflected.
I work in the law library. I can tell you not on stage who the bad apples are, who are the parishes whose word can't be trusted. In every school, the staff and the teachers know who the weak teachers are, the strong teachers are. In a Garda barracks, they will tell you that guards, they don't want to be out on the shift with because the guy more likely to cross the line. But there's a sense, perhaps among some of the public, that in the guards all that gets, you know, that those who speak out, the guard dare not speak out to criticise other guards or something they do, because whether it's on a local level or the national level, they won't be heard. Is that unfair? Is that accurate? Is it?
I think there is certainly a perception, and I think you know, a perception that needs to be dealt with. And what we have done is encourage people to have the confidence to speak out. We're doing a lot of work at the moment with, for example, Transparency International, and making sure that people can. But even before we get to that stage, I think it's empowering people. And one thing that I find with the people that are in the organisation now, and society has changed so much, people are more inclined to speak their minds. And people are more inclined to speak out and say, I've seen this, I don't really like the sound or the feel of that, and bring it to our attention. And what we've encouraged all of our members to do, our Garda, our civilian and our reserve members, is to speak out if they see something. I've communicated personally with all of the people in the organisation and say it's in your entitlement, but it's also your right, and it's a duty to speak up if you see something that you're not sure about. And you know, again, I think it's really important as well to empower our managers to be more open to that, because me and my generation are probably the last generation of managers and leaders in organisations that actually are more used to compliance rather than commitment, I like to call it. So we're the last generation of managers. Yes, we are a very disciplined organisation, but because somebody questions, or because somebody asks, or because somebody maybe puts forward a different point of view, it's not necessarily that they've been in any way insubordinate. It actually means that they need to be listened to, they need to be heard, and it needs to be fed back to them.
I'm going to ask the audience for a couple of questions in a second if we can get the mobile microphones, but I want to ask you a couple of policing questions. I can think in my own head, looking at even across the New Ross district, holiday homes which have been broken into, diesel tanks siphoned, tool shed bursted open and raided at night, tire shops broken into. I'm just thinking of individual instances I know myself. And there's a sense in many parts of rural Ireland that policing has withdrawn from rural Ireland and left it exposed at a time when whether it's gangs or individuals can come down the motorways and cause havoc, commit crimes, and get away with it and get back. I mean, well, what do you say to people who say, what the hell are you doing about it?
Well, I actually think we're doing a lot better, but that we are here in New Ross and indeed in Wexford. I know John MacDonald, the local superintendent, is here, and some of my colleagues from here. But I think, if you look around here in the Wexford division and in the New Ross district, absolutely, we're very conscious of the fact that there are a number of unoccupied homes here right throughout the summer. Also very conscious right throughout the country of the fear of crime, and particularly the fear that's perpetrated by people that travel the length and breadth of the country. But there have been some tremendous seizures here, and I know the Taoiseach and Minister Keogh are here, and again, I'd like to acknowledge the government investment, and I remember speaking to the Taoiseach and the then Minister for Public Expenditure and Reform and saying, if you can give us some investment in An Garda Síochána, if you can give us some money, we can actually produce the results. And to be fair to the Taoiseach and the government, we secured investment to put in Operation Thor, which was particularly there to deal with rural crime, and not just to deal with the criminals that were committing it, but actually to work in partnership with the community through Muintir Matera, through the IFA, and through the local community neighbourhood policing network, to make sure that we were reaching out our crime prevention initiatives as well. But maybe just to give you an example here in Wexford, and I think it's very much testament to the men and women of the division here in Wexford, but also the men and women the length and breadth of the country. Crime, and rural crime in particular, is at an all-time low. We've seen over a 34% reduction in property crime since Operation Thor started on the 2nd of November last year. And that's an incredible statistic. That is the biggest reduction in crime that we have ever seen. The investment, the sense of withdrawal from the rural community, and we go all the way from the rural to the absolutely global, because actually the fear of crime is very, very real in communities. But actually what deals with that is the real engagement, building trust, building confidence, getting into the communities. And our members do that through being out there in the communities. And again, going around talking to people in rural areas, and as you say, Noel, I visit a lot of rural areas as well. What you hear now is I'm seeing more guards, I'm seeing the high-powered vehicles, the guards are out there. The other great thing, and we can't take away from it, when recruitment stopped and we don't have any young guards coming through, everybody in this room knows the sense of excitement that comes from having a new recruit, a new guard going out into the community. And with the new guards that have come into Templemore since 2015, it's tremendous to hear back from the community how welcome they are there and the difference that they're making, providing that reassurance.
And then if you move into certain parts of inner city Dublin, this terrifies us all as we watch it in the country, since the Regency, the shooting in the Regency Hotel, and I've lost count, 12 or 13 murders by one particular gang, including one in Spain, and two who involved civilians, including the one in Spain, who just happened to be in the place where the target of the gang was. Again, what do you say to people who say, what the hell are you doing about it?
I would say we're doing a lot, and the nature of policing is such that actually sometimes what we're doing, as I said earlier, there are a lot of things that we're doing that for very justifiable reasons that we cannot talk about. But if I look at that, and again, I'm always very conscious of the impact that that has on the community, and particularly the community I spoke about earlier in the northern city, where that feuding is very much concentrated. It has a huge effect on the community, but also, of course, on the loved ones and the bereaved from the families. But the work that we're doing, both nationally and internationally, and that, and just to give maybe a flavour of it, in terms of nationally, we have over 13 arrests. We have a number of people before the courts charged with very serious offences, and including before the Special Criminal Court. Again, a lot of people would have heard recently, working with our colleagues in the Police Service of Northern Ireland, we have a person been extradited charged with murder. And also we've seized significant quantities of firearms and significant quantities of drugs and money, which really debilitates the ability of these people to continue. But what's really the international cooperation that it takes to deal with these gangs, we're truly international. We have excellent cooperation.
Are you getting enough help in Spanish? I mean, the suggestion is that some of these murders in the city centre of Dublin have been ordered by mobile phone from some gang lord sitting by a swimming pool in south of Spain.
Well, as I said earlier,
in fairness, if you were trying to tackle that kind of crime, pattern of crime in Dublin when you were managing districts, whatever, you were in control of the resources. Here, those that are directing this crime are living in Spain or abroad or whatever.
You know,
is the level of cooperation what it should be for them?
The level of cooperation is excellent, and we have very good working relationships with, for example, Europol and Interpol, but also with both the policing and security services in all of those countries. So, for example, in Spain, in Holland, in Belgium, and further afield, we have excellent levels of cooperation. And, you know, I am very, very confident that, and I know that the work is being done, and I'm very confident that not just the results that we have seen, but I think we're going to continue to see results. And, again, I think, and sometimes the work that people don't see going on, in order for, as I call it, civilised living to take place, there's lots of covert police work that goes on every single day that doesn't always produce tangible results that people read about in the newspapers. But that doesn't mean that it's not happening, and I think it's important that people know that it is happening.
The other thing we hear a lot in my own views is at times a lazy phrase that just suggests that the morale of Garda Síochána is on the floor. And sometimes that's because of the controversies, but my own instinct is that morale is first and foremost affected by paying conditions. I mean, we're not paying a starting guard for 26,000 a year just. I mean, it's a lot of money for somebody putting their life on the line and the kind of hours. But I mean, you accept, and I know that you're able to threaten industrial action on this, that in relative terms, the pay and conditions and circumstances of individual Gardaí is a lot less than it was 10 or 12 years ago.
I think that, no, firstly, what I would say is that no different than everybody over the last number of years, I think everybody has suffered. And in terms of Garda Síochána, if I was to be honest, I would say that I don't think any money can pay the men and women that go out every day and literally hire that thin blue line.
A little bit more would help.
I think that, at the end of the day, there are a number of issues. So if I give an example, when I took over first as Garda Commissioner, we did a survey of all of our members, our Garda, our civilian, our reserve members. A number of things came to the fore. Central to it was pay. Give us decent pay to do the job. But other things were around equipment, around we want to get out, we want to do the job, the conditions that people work in. And I think, we have to recognise that over the last 94 years, the men and women of Garda Síochána have worked in conditions which are really, really archaic. And to be fair, we put a programme together, a programme of reform, which is going to take us into the next century of policing in Ireland, 22nd century policing. We presented it to the Taoiseach and to government, and the government invested hugely. So what we have addressed, I think it's important to look at, and then maybe we'll deal with what's left. What we have addressed is actually the conditions that our men and women work in. So making sure that there's investment in proper stations. Here, for example, in Wexford, there's a new station which has been built at the moment. It's going to be a focal point for the community, but also good conditions for our members. Right across the country, we've started a refurbishment work around the stations. We've invested in new cars, in new technology, and most importantly, as I said earlier, recruitment. The one issue that's left that still really is hurting people is pay. And there are mechanisms there to address that, and I think if everybody engages constructively in those mechanisms, again, I'm very confident that they will be addressed.
Are you worried about a new flu?
I would always be worried about anything that would interfere with policing, because I think that we have seen over the last 2 years the momentum that we have built up. I think we have seen the inroads that we are making in terms of organised crime, in terms of rural crime, and I would not like to see. And there is no two ways about it. Policing is resource intensive. Policing is expensive. But when you do have it, and I think it is show rather than tell, because everybody has to see the return on the investment. But when the investment is made in policing and in professional policing, the return is evident to all.